first 2 years of the Civil War brought little good news for the North. In the East, the Union suffered stalemate and setback, beginning with the first major clash, the Battle of Bull Run in July 1861, where Northern troops retreated. The Union's only bright spots were in the war's western theater, where Union forces captured New Orleans and brought large sections of the Mississippi River under their control. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln made history by signing the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed all slaves in rebelling states and endowed the Union cause with increased fervor. During the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863, the North finally achieved a major victory in the East. In 1864, Union forces in the East were stalemated again, as General Ulysses S. Grant's troops were locked in a long siege of Petersburg, Virginia. Doubts flourished over the upcoming presidential contest. The doubts were not just about who would win, but also whether the election would take place at all. During the middle of a wrenching war, no government enjoys the prospect of an election, for the chances of being unseated is great. So it was for the Lincoln administration, which for much of the year expected to lose the election. Nonetheless, when faced with suggestions to postpone the election until the war was over, Lincoln was quoted in saying, "We cannot have free government without elections, and if a rebellion could force us to forego or postpone the national election, it might fairly claim to have already conquered and ruined us." The Democrats hoped to capitalize on the war weariness of the North to turn Lincoln out of office, but the party was still badly divided. Some Democrats, the so-called War Democrats, supported the Union war effort, while many others, called Peace Democrats or Copperheads, opposed it. The Democrats holding their national convention in Chicago for the first time adopted a Copperhead platform that criticized the Lincoln administration's handling of the war and so called for a ceasefire and immediate negotiations with the South. The Democrats nominated General George McClellan of New Jersey, the former commander of the Army of the Potomac, with General George Pendleton, a congressman from Ohio, as his running mate. Self-assured brass officer, McClellan assumed command of the Army of the Potomac in late 1861, but showed little appetite for action. He chronically postponed attacking the Confederate Army, overestimating the enemy's troop strength, and demanding more reinforcements from Washington, which he bitterly blamed for his own timidity. Lincoln, frustrated by what he called McClellan's slows, removed him from command in July 1862, but out of desperation restored him later that month, dismissing him for good in November 1862. McClellan had often showed a brazen disrespect for his commander-in-chief, referring to Lincoln as an idiot and a well-meaning baboon. By running for president, McClellan hoped to exact a measure of vengeance. In a move designed to placate war Democrats, McClellan backed away from the Democratic platform by declaring that the one and only immutable condition of the armistice with the South would be the restoration of the Union. McClellan was harshly critical of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. He maintained that emancipation should not be a war goal, and Democrats played on racist sentiments in the North by charging that the tyrant leader, Abraham Africanus I, favored intermarriage between blacks and whites. Privately, to ensure their return to the Union, McClellan wanted to guarantee returning southern states their constitutional rights, including the right to slavery. At the Republican convention in Baltimore, Lincoln secured his renomination and the delegates picked as his running mate Andrew Johnson. Johnson was not a Republican, he was a war Democrat who had been a U.S. Senator from Tennessee, the only senator from a Confederate state to remain loyal to the Union. In 1862, Lincoln appointed him military governor of Tennessee. Since 1861, the Republican Party had been known as the National Union Party to emphasize its commitment to preserving the Union and to attract Unionist Democrats of the same stamp as Johnson. The party's platform demanded the South's unconditional surrender and also called for a constitutional amendment to end slavery.
Lincoln was in deep political trouble. Recent history boded ill for him, as no sitting president had won 2 terms since Andrew Jackson. The war had dragged on for 3 years, with appalling casualties and no immediate end in sight. Northern morale had sunk to a nadir, and many Americans doubted Lincoln's stewardship. Given the war's slaughter, Democrats labeled him Abe the Widowmaker, and even Republicans were ready to abandon him. He had scant support in Congress and the radical Republicans, a wing of the party that favored civil rights for blacks and harsh peace terms for the South, wanted to dump Lincoln and nominate instead his Treasury Secretary, Salmon Chase. In the summer of 1864, after having won the nomination, Lincoln dolefully predicted, "I'm going to be beaten, and unless some great changes take place, badly beaten." As historian James McPherson has written, if the election had been held in August 1864 instead of November, Lincoln would have lost. He would have thus gone down in history as a loser, a failure unequal to the challenge of the greatest crisis in the American experience. But late in the summer, 2 smashing military successes caused a dramatic change of Lincoln's political prospects. On September 1st, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman captured Atlanta, a crown city of the Lower South, paving the way for his devastating march to the sea to Savannah. General Philip Sheridan added to the carnage on Southern soil by conducting a merciless campaign of total war through Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. Grant's instructions to Sheridan were to transform the region into a barren waste, so that crows flying over it will have to carry their supplies with them. Sheridan inflicted utter destruction on a region that Confederate General Robert E. Lee was counting on to supply his troops. The tide of the war was clearly turning in the Union's favor, and the victories of Sherman and Sheridan boosted Northern morale enough to ensure Lincoln's re-election. Also helpful to Lincoln was the entry of Nevada, another free state, to the Union, plus the vote of Union soldiers, many of whom were granted temporary furloughs so that they could return home to cast ballots. Estimates were that Lincoln won 80% of the soldier vote. Only the northern states voted in the election of 1864. The 11 states that had seceded and proclaimed themselves a new nation did not participate. Lincoln won every state in the Union except for Kentucky, Delaware, and McClellan's home state of New Jersey. He crushed McClellan in the Electoral College, 212 votes to 21. This time, Lincoln won a comfortable majority of popular votes, 55% to McClellan's 45%. Harper's Weekly ran what became a famous cartoon showing the tall, lanky chief executive with unusually long legs. Long Abraham Lincoln, a little longer, the caption read. One of the most important results of this election was that it paved the way for emancipation. The Emancipation Proclamation had no legal standing, and it did not apply to the rebelling states. Had McClellan won, he would have revoked it. After winning re-election, Lincoln led the drive for a constitutional amendment outlawing slavery. He got to see Congress pass the amendment on January 31, 1865, but its ratification was completed in December, 8 months after his death.